After making a few hurried preparations, they stole forth with bright, expectant faces, bearing a broken spade and a rusty implement that had done many a day's service when Ralph was a hale worker on the dikes. It was so light out of doors they could see the willow tree distinctly. The frozen ground was hard as stone, but Hans and his mother were resolute. Their only dread was they might disturb the sleepers in the cottage. "This icebreaker is just the thing, mother," said Hans, striking many a vigorous blow. "But the ground has set so firm, it'll be a fair match for it." "Ah, never fear, Hans," she answered, watching him eagerly. "Here, let me try a while." They soon succeeded in making an impression. One opening, and the rest was not so difficult. Still they worked on, taking turns, whispering cheerily to one another. Now and then, Dame Brinker stepped noiselessly over the threshold and listened, to be certain that her husband slept. "What grand news it will be for him," she said, laughing, "when he's strong enough to bear it. How I should like to put the pouch and the stocking just as we find them, all full of money, near him this blessed night, for the dear man to see when he wakens." "We must get them first, mother," panted Hans, still tugging away at his work. "There's no doubt of that. They can't slip away from us now," she answered, shivering with cold and excitement as she crouched beside the opening. "Like enough, we'll find them stowed in an earthen pot I lost long ago." By this time, Hans too began to tremble, but not with cold. He had penetrated a foot deep for quite a space on the south side of the tree. At any moment, they might come into the treasure. Meantime, the stars winked and blinked at each other as if to say, "Queer country, this Holland. How much we do see, to be sure. Strange that the dear father should have put it down so woeful deep," said Dame Brinker, in a rather provoked tone. "Ah, the ground was soft enough then, I warrant. How wise of him to mistrust Jan Campusen, and Jan in full credit at the time. Little I thought that handsome fellow with his gay ways would ever go to jail. Now, Hans, let me take a turn. It's lighter work, do you see, the deeper we go. I'd be loath to kill the tree, Hans. Will we harm it, think you?" "I cannot say," he answered gravely. Hour after hour, mother and son worked on. The hole grew larger and deeper. Clouds began to gather in the sky, throwing elfish shadows as they passed. Not until the moon and stars faded away and streaks of daylight began to appear did Mietje and Hans look helplessly and hopelessly into each other's faces. They had searched thoroughly, desperately, all around the tree, south, north, east, west. The hidden money was not there. Annie Bowman had a healthy distaste for Jan Zoon Kolp. Jan Zoon Kolp, in his own rough way, adored Annie. Annie declared she could not to save her life say one civil word to that odious boy. Jan Zoon believed her to be the sweetest, sauciest creature in the world. Annie laughed among her playmates at the comical flapping of Jan Zoon's tattered and dingy jacket. He sighed in solitude over the floating grace of her jaunty blue petticoat. She thanked her stars that her brothers were not like the Kolps, and he growled at his sister because she was not like the Bowmans. They seemed to exchange natures whenever they met. His presence made her harsh and unfeeling, and the very sight of her made him gentle as a lamb. Of course, they were thrown together very often. It is thus that in some mysterious way we are convinced of error and cured of prejudice. In this case, however, the scheme failed. Annie detested Janzoon more and more at each encounter, and Janzoon liked her better and better every day. "He killed a stork, the wicked old wretch," she would say to herself. "She knows I am strong and fearless," thought Janzoon. "How red and freckled and ugly he is," was Annie's secret comment when she looked at him. "How she stares and stares," thought Janzoon. "Well, I am a fine weather-beaten fellow, anyway." "Janzoon Kolp, you impudent boy, go right away from me," Annie often said. "I don't want any of your company." Laughed Janzoon to himself. "Girls never say what they mean. I'll skate with her every chance I can get." And so it came to pass that the pretty maid would not look up that morning when, skating homeward from Amsterdam, she became convinced that a burly boy was coming down the canal toward her. If I look at him," thought Annie, "I'll—" "Good morning, Annie Bowman," said a pleasant voice. How a smile brightens a girl's face. "Good morning, Master Hans. I'm right glad to meet you." How a smile brightens a boy's face. "Good morning again, Annie. There's been a great change at our house since you left." "How so?" she exclaimed, opening her eyes very wide. Hans, who had been in a great hurry and rather moody, grew talkative and quite at leisure in Annie's sunshine. Turning about and skating slowly with her toward Broek, he told the good news of his father. Annie was a true friend, and so she could be trusted with everything. And she learned how everything depended upon his obtaining work, and he could find nothing to do in the neighborhood. All this was not said as a complaint, but just because she was looking at him and really wished to know. He could not speak of last night's bitter disappointment, for that secret was not wholly his own. "Goodbye, Annie," he said at last. "The morning is going fast, and I must hasten to Amsterdam and sell these skates. Mother must have money at once. Before nightfall, I shall certainly find a job somewhere." "Sell your new skates, Hans," cried Annie. "You, the best skater here in Broek. Why, the race is coming off in 5 days." "I know it," he answered resolutely. "Goodbye. I shall skate home again on the old wooden ones." Such a bright glance, so different from Janzoon's ugly grin, and Hans was off like an arrow. "Hans, come back," she called. Her voice changed the arrow into a top. Spinning around, he darted in one long, leaning sweep toward her. "Then you really are going to sell your new skates if you can find a customer?" "Of course I am." "Well, Hans, if you are going to sell your skates," said Annie, somewhat confused, "I mean, if you, well, I know somebody who would like to buy them, that's all." "Not Janzoon Kolp?" asked Hans, flushing. "Oh, no," pouted Annie. "Janzoon Kolp is not one of my friends." "But you know him," persisted Hans. Annie laughed. "Yes, I know him, and it's all the worse for him that I do. Now, please, Hans, don't ever talk any more to me about Janzoon. I hate him." "Hate him? You hate anybody, Annie?" She shook her head saucily. "Yes, and I'll hate you, too, if you persist in calling him one of my friends." You boys may like him because he caught the greased goose at the kermis last summer and climbed the pole with his great ugly body tied up in a sack. But I don't care for such things. I've disliked him ever since I saw him try to push his little sister out of the merry-go-round at Amsterdam. And it's no secret up our way who killed the stork on your mother's roof. But we mustn't talk about such a bad, wicked fellow, really, Hans. I know somebody who would be glad to buy your skates. You won't get half price for them in Amsterdam. Please, give them to me. I'll take you the money this very afternoon. If Annie was charming, even when she said hate, there was no withstanding her when she said please. At least Hans found it so. Annie, he said, taking off the skates and rubbing them carefully with a snarl of twine before handing them to him. I'm sorry to be so particular, but if your friend should not want them, will you bring them back to me today? I must buy peat and meal for the mother early tomorrow morning. My friend will want them, laughed Annie, nodding gaily and skating off at top speed. As Hans drew forth the wooden runners from his capacious pockets and fastened them on as best he could, he did not hear Annie murmur, I wish I had not been so rude. Poor brave Hans. What a noble boy he is. And as Annie skated homeward filled with pleasant thoughts, she did not hear Hans say, I grumbled like a bear. But, bless her, some girls are like angels. Perhaps it was for the best. One cannot be expected to know everything that is going on in the world. Luxuries unfit us for returning to hardships easily endured. The wooden runner squeaked more than ever. It was as much as Hans could do to get on with the clumsy old things. Still, he did not regret that he had parted with his beautiful skates, but resolutely pushed back the boy's trouble that he had not been able to keep them just a little longer, at least until after the race. Mother surely will not be angry with me, he thought, for selling them without her leave. He has had care enough already. It will be full time to speak of it when I take home the money. Hans went up and down the streets of Amsterdam that day looking for work. He succeeded in earning a few stivers by assisting a man who was driving a train of loaded mules into the city. But he could not secure steady employment anywhere. He would have been glad to obtain a situation as porter or errand boy, but though he passed on his way many a loitering, shuffling urchin laden with bundles, there was no place for him. Some shopkeepers had just supplied themselves. Others needed a trimmer, more lightly built fellow. They meant better dressed, but did not choose to say so. Others told him to call again in a month or two, when the canals would probably be broken up, and many shook their heads at him without saying a word. At the factories, he met with no better luck. It seemed to him that in those great buildings, turning out respectively such tremendous quantities of woolen, cotton, and linen stuffs, such world-renowned dyes and paints, such precious diamonds cut from the rough, such supplies of meal, of bricks, of glass and china, that in at least one of these, a strong-armed boy, able and eager to work, could find something to do. But no, nearly the same answer met him everywhere. No, indeed, no need of more hands just now. If he had called before Nicholas Day, they might have given him a job, as they were hurried then, but at present they had more boys than they needed. Hans wished they could see, just for a moment, his mother and Gretel. He did not know how the anxiety of both looked out from his eyes. and how more than once the gruffest denials were uttered with an uncomfortable consciousness that the lad ought not to be turned away. Certain fathers, when they went home that night, spoke more kindly than usual to their own youngsters, from memory of a frank young face saddened at their words. Before morning, one man actually resolved that he would instruct his head man Brinker to set the boy from Berwick at something, if he should come in again. But Hans knew nothing of all this. Toward sundown, he started on his return to Berwick, uncertain whether the strange choking sensation in his throat arose from discouragement or resolution. There was certainly one more chance. Mynheer van Hulp might have returned by this time. Master Peter, it was reported, had gone to Haarlem the night before to attend to something connected with the skating race. Still, Hans would go and try. Fortunately, Peter had returned early that morning. He was at home when Hans reached there, and was just about starting for the Brinker cottage. "Ah, Hans," he cried as the weary boy approached the door. "You are the very one I wish to see. Come in and warm yourself." After tugging at his well-worn hat, which was always sticking to his head when he was embarrassed, Hans knelt down, not by way of making a new style of Oriental salute, not to worship the goddess of cleanliness who presided there, but because his heavy shoes would have filled the soul of the Berwick housewife with horror. When their owner stepped softly into the house, they were left outside to act as sentinels until his return. Hans left the Van Hulp mansion with a lightened heart. Peter had brought word from Haarlem that the young Brinker was to commence work on the summer house doors immediately. There was a comfortable workshop on the place, and it was to be at his service until the carving was done. Peter did not tell Hans that he had skated all the way to Haarlem for the purpose of arranging this plan with Mynheer van Hulp. It was enough for him to see the glad, eager look rise on young Brinker's face. "I think I can do it," said Hans. "Though I have never learned the trade, I am sure you can," responded Peter heartily. "You will find every tool you require in the workshop. It is nearly hidden yonder by that wall of twigs. In summer, when the hedge is green, one cannot see the shop from here at all. How is your father today?" "Better, Mynheer. He improves every hour." "It is the most astonishing thing I ever heard of. That gruff old doctor's a great fellow after all." "Ah, Mynheer," said Hans warmly. "He is more than that. He is more than great. He is good. But for the Meester's kind heart and great skill, my poor father would yet be in the dark. I think, Mynheer," he added with kindling eyes, "surgery is the very noblest science in the world." Peter shrugged his shoulders. "Very noble it may be, but not quite to my taste. This Dr. Boykman certainly has skill. As for his heart, defend me from such hearts as his." "Why do you say so, Mynheer?" asked Hans. Just then a lady slowly entered from an adjoining apartment. It was Mevrouw van Hulp, arrayed in the grandest of caps and the longest of satin aprons ruffled with lace. She nodded placidly as Hans stepped back from the fire, bowing as well as he knew how. Peter at once drew a high-backed oaken chair toward the fire, and the lady seated herself. There was a block of cork on each side of the chimney-place. One of these he placed under his mother's feet. Hans turned to go. "Wait a moment, if you please, young man," said the lady. "I accidentally overheard you and my son speaking, I think, of my friend Dr. Boykman. You were right, young man. Dr. Boykman has a very kind heart. You perceive, Peter? We may be quite mistaken in judging of a person solely by their manners. though a courteous deportment is by no means to be despised. I intended no disrespect, mother, said Peter, but surely one has no right to go growling and snarling through the world as they say he does. Ah, they say? Ah, Peter, they means everybody or nobody. Surgeon Boykman has had a great sorrow. Many years ago he lost his only child under painful circumstances, a fine lad. Except that he was a thought too hasty and high-spirited. Before then, Gerard Boykman was one of the most agreeable gentlemen I ever knew. So saying, Mevrouw van Hoop, looking kindly upon the two boys, arose and left the room with the same dignity with which she had entered. Peter, only half convinced, muttered something about the sin of allowing sorrow to turn all one's honey into gall, as he conducted his visitor to the narrow side door. Before they parted, he advised Hans to keep himself in good skating order, for, he added, now that your father is all right, you will be in fine spirits for the race. That will be the prettiest skating show ever seen in this part of the world. Everybody is talking about it. You are going to try for the prize, remember. I shall not be in the race, Mynheer, said Hans, looking down. Not be in the race? Why not, indeed? And immediately Peter's thoughts swept on a full tide of suspicion toward Karl Schummel. Because I cannot, Mynheer, answered Hans, as he bent to slip his feet into his big shoes. Something in the boy's manner warned Peter that it would be no kindness to press the matter any further. He bade Hans good-bye, and stood thoughtfully watching him as he walked away. In a minute, Peter called out, Hans Brinker! Yes, Mynheer. I'll take back all I said about Dr. Boykman. Yes, Mynheer. Both were laughing. But Peter's smile changed to a look of puzzled surprise when he saw Hans kneel down by the canal and put on the wooden skates. Very queer, muttered Peter, shaking his head as he turned to go into the house. Why in the world doesn't the boy wear his new ones? The sun was not quite down out of sight when our hero, with a happy heart and with something like a sneer in his countenance as he jerked off the wooden runners, trudged hopefully toward the tiny hut-like building, known of old as the idiot's cottage. Duller eyes than his would have discerned two slight figures moving near the doorway. That gray, well-patched jacket, and the dull blue skirt covered with an apron of still duller blue, that faded, close-fitting cap, and those quick little feet in their great boat-like shoes, they were Gretzel's, of course. He would have known them anywhere. And that bright, coquettish red jacket with its pretty skirt, bordered with black, that graceful cap bobbing over the gold earrings, and that dainty apron, and those snug leather shoes that seemed to have grown with the feet, why, if the Pope of Rome had sent them to him by express, Hans would have sworn they were Annie's. The two girls were slowly pacing up and down in front of the cottage. Their arms were entwined, of course, and their heads were nodding and shaking as emphatically as if all the affairs of the kingdom were under discussion. With a joyous shout, Hans hastened toward them. "Huzza, girls! I found work!" This brought his mother to the cottage door. She, too, had pleasant tidings. The father was still improving. He had been sitting up nearly all day, and was sleeping now, as Dame Brinker declared, just as quiet as a lamb. "It's my turn now, Hans," said Annie, drawing him aside after her, and he had told his mother the good word from Mynheer van Hoop. "Your skates are sold, and here's the money."